it's Laura with Raintree Nursery. And summer has really hit here in the Pacific Northwest. It's warm. And if it's warm here, you can be sure it's very hot in some other parts of the country. So I've checked in with our Raintree Plant Ambassadors, some of whom grow in very hot climates, and ask them how they think about and plan for these hot summer weathers when they're putting trees and shrubs into the ground. And we have got their best tips and strategies for you today. What we are learning about climate change is that it is changing previously regular weather patterns all over the country. Some areas of the country are having cold snaps that are colder and colder for longer than they have been previously. And of course, we're also learning that some parts of the country are getting hotter and hotter for longer than they ever have before. That's why it becomes so important to think strategically about how you prepare your soils before you plant and how you can care for your plants once they're in the ground so they can thrive and you don't have to spend your whole summer watering plants. One of the things we know about plants is that they are constantly trying to keep themselves cool, especially when temperatures go above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a magic number, 86 degrees. When plants get above 86 degrees, they really need to have all the water they want to keep water circulating up and into the leaf tips and down into the roots, or they start to die. Now, some plants that are adapted to hot conditions where it's regularly over 86 degrees are particularly efficient at doing that. But some of the plants that we want to grow are not particularly well adapted to high heat climates. And so this is why it becomes critically important to provide enough water so that plants can keep doing their transpiration, the movement of water up and into the tips of the plants, even when it gets super hot. If the plants don't have enough water to do this, they will begin to try to mechanically protect themselves. That leads to leaves curling, it leads to wilting. And if the plant still isn't able to manage its internal heat, the leaves and the wood will begin to die. And once those leaves and wood have died, they simply can't come back. So, our job as good plant stewards is to make sure that the soil contains all the water that the plants need to keep themselves cool. Now, the first order of business before you plant a plant is to decide what you're going to add to your soil that's going to hold water. How are you going to keep that water in your soil so it's available when the plants need it? And I think the easiest and most effective way to do this is to add compost to your planting holes. Now, compost is composted organic matter. You can't just add wood chips and kitchen waste to your soil and think that's going to work well. No, it needs to be composted so that what it becomes is like a natural sponge. When it is added to your soil, it holds water. It will lighten heavy clay soils. It will add water holding capacity to sandy, fast draining soils. Compost is the bomb, and it goes in every single plant I plant. At least a third of what you put back in that hole should be compost. It could be even more if you have really dry soils or a hot climate, and you need to make sure that that water stays in the root zone so your plants can use it. The second thing I like to think about is the potential to add mycelial spores. There is this amazing mushroom network that works in active, biologically fertile soils, and this network will move water laterally, sideways, through the soil from plant to plant. Sometimes these networks exist in soils and sometimes they don't. And if you want the benefits of having the mycelial network work for you, then you should grab what's called inoculant. It usually looks like ash. It comes in little bags. You can add it to the soil when you plant, or you can add it to the water when you're watering in your plants. It is spores from mushrooms, mycelium, that you add to your soil. And as long as you keep those soils moist, those spores will become that network that will work with you to keep your plants happy and healthy. Now that we've talked about how to prepare your soil to accept and hold the water you're going to give it, let's talk about watering. Rule number 1 of watering is water either in the morning or in the evening. Water during the cool parts of the day. Now, don't get me wrong, if you realize that it's gotten too hot and you haven't watered your plants lately and you think about watering them in the middle of the day, hey, give them some water. But if you're going to be thoughtful about how you apply the water, you want to give it to them in the early morning so they can soak it all up and be ready to use it throughout the day. Or give it to them in the evening so that they can rehydrate and prepare themselves for the next few days. Let's listen to what our plant ambassadors have to say about watering.
Do 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 do. Oh, hi neighbor. I'm out here just making sure that my new plants are staying hydrated. I do that by using sheet mulching, which is a layer of cardboard, compost, and wood chips on top. Sometimes I also like to set my hose on a drip and let it water my new plant for me. I set a timer and I go do other things. I've also got some rain barrels, and I'm slowly but surely adding a rain barrel to each of my downspouts so that I can collect clean water for free. And my plants love it, and I do too. That's it for me, Kelly. See you later, neighbor.
Hi, it's Brian from Raintree Nursery, and I'm the Midwest Ambassador. It's been a lot of fun working and talking to some of you people and working with you on your plants. I hope everything's going well. It's 86, 87 degrees right now in the sun and hot. We usually get pretty cold weather from, I'd say, the mid 80s to mid 90s most of the time on a hot day like this in the Midwest. And it can get much warmer. It can get over 100 sometimes. And I would say that would be from late May all the way to September. I do water, and when I water, these are little trees that I have grafted for the local 4-H club. I water them every day under covered, I don't know if my wife can get a shot of that. We have a covered place where it's mostly shade every day, and it keeps they get some sun exposure. But if I kept these out in the hard sun all day, they probably wouldn't make it for that long because they're still kind of healing up and growing.
Hello to all my fellow fruit enthusiasts. My name's Heather, and I'm Raintree Nursery's Plant Ambassador for Texas. With water, you need to decide how you're going to conserve it, how you're going to apply it, and if you're going to automate it with timers. I have one source of water outside of my lawn's sprinkler system. I use timers, splitters, hoses, and soaker hoses. Automating your water is the best way to ensure you get the results you want in your garden or orchard.
I'll set up a drip hose, and a drip hose is just a hose that is made of a more porous material, and then I'll put that on a timer to go off at a certain time every day to water the trees. And instead of me having to take a hose and spraying water everywhere, it just slowly drips water. This is good for a couple reasons. It helps so that you aren't wasting any water. And it also helps prevent the spread of pathogens on your trees, because if you have a hose and you're just spraying it everywhere, a lot of pathogens like that moisture and they spread with moisture. So those are a couple things I do. Another thing that I also try to do to help save water, and especially this spring when things were so dry, is we set up rain barrels, and we can take water and water around the yard if we need from the rain barrels that we've saved up. All right, thank you so much for your time. Have a great week.
When it comes to applying water to your plants, I have a couple of tried and true strategies that I use. I have tried a lot of different methods here, and these are my favorites. So if you've got a long run and you want to use a hose, this kind of hose is called a sprinkler hose. It's very durable. I've had this hose for, I don't know, 8 years. It has a blank side, and it has a side with a white strip on it. The white strip side has perforations that allow a fair amount of water to come out of this hose. This is a great tool. Now, the one drawback of a hose like this is it doesn't go around curves very effectively. And so if you have to put a curved portion in your hose, these landscape staples are invaluable. Now, another ancient technology, if you're going to water individual plants, is to use clay pots. Wow, this has probably been around for thousands of years. And the water that you apply will soak out through the clay very slowly, and it helps keep the subsoil of your plants moist. You also notice that the neck of this container is narrowed to avoid evaporation while it is buried and sitting in the hot sun and evaporating. Now, if you don't have access to a bunch of really fantastic clay pots like this, my little trick here is that you can do the same thing with simple black pots and a piece of wood or a saucer, something you can put over the top. You bury 1 or 2 or 3 of these next to a plant that you want to water. You fill this up with water morning or evening. You put your cover over the top of it to minimize the transpiration that might happen, and the holes from this pot will apply that water deeper down so that once again you can keep the subsoil hydrated as well, which encourages your trees and plants to dig deeper and find their own water. One of our Southeast plant ambassadors, Diane, shared this really innovative strategy for capturing water and allowing it to soak slowly into the soil after heavy rains. She's from Tennessee. They get regular summer rain, and it comes all at once, about once a week. So what she does is she digs a hole outside of the root zone of her plants, uphill on a slope if she can manage it, so that when water is coming down the slope, it will fill the hole and slowly soak into both the topsoil and the subsoil to really keep things hydrated. Now, the secret to a hole like this is to make sure that you either cover the edges with burlap, something that will keep the hole stable, or you fill the hole with wood chips or even rocks to make sure that the hole stays open and you have a lot of space in between all those things to hold all the water that this hole will receive. I love this idea. It's brilliant. Another thing to think about when it comes to capturing and holding water is to use rocks to make a ring at the base of your plants. This forms kind of a corral, and it lets you add lots of water all at once because you've got a large capacity well around the base of your plants. So what I would do is I would probably backfill against these rocks to make rather a flat surface, and then add some wood chips perhaps to that to act as mulch, and then allow this to take, 10 gallons once or twice a week all at once, and know that it's all going to go right here. It's not going to run off down the slope because I've made a corral. One last really great things about rocks in hot climates have to do with the way that they create condensation. There's usually a cooling influence at dusk and at dawn, where water rises gently up out of the soil. And if you've got rocks in connection with the soil, that moisture will condense on the bottom of the rock because of the differential in temperature, and it will drop back down into the soil. So you can create a very gentle, self-watering system using stones in summer climates. Now, for those of you who are growing in really hot desert climates, I encourage you to check out the folks at Edge of Nowhere Farm in Arizona. They have really dialed in some very efficient earthworks that they use to surround each of the individual trees that they plant so that water can be used efficiently and it can soak into the root zone of each of their trees to keep the roots and the soil happy, healthy, and productive. You can see that what they do is they create an earthen channel from the irrigation bib, and then that channel becomes a circle that will be at the exterior drip line of the trees. They prune their trees so they only get so large. They flood water the channel and the circle after they fill it with wood chips. The wood chips get soaked, the soil gets soaked, and it settles and holds that moisture so everything stays wet and vibrant. Really one of my favorite strategies for keeping plants and soil cool is mulch. Heavy, thick mulch. You'll notice there is a thin portion near the center where the tree is. It's thicker here. That's the donut shape of mulch. You don't want the volcano shape where you've got mulch up against the tree. I like wood chips because they increase the biological activity of the soil by bringing in the mycelial network. Eventually they'll just kind of degrade over time, and woody plants benefit from woody mulch. Now that said, if you don't have access to wood chips, you can use hog fuel, you can use weeds, you can use grass, you can use shade cloth, you could use sheets. Anything that's going to shade the soil will make an effective mulch. Now, our plant ambassadors have a lot to say about mulch.
Hi, this is Dan Limbert, Raintree Nursery Plant Ambassador for the subtropic region. I lived in South and Central Florida for many years, and I currently live in the Denver metro area in Colorado. In South and Central Florida, we tended to have two seasons. A hot, humid, very rainy season for about half the year, and the other half of the year was drier and cooler. Here in Colorado, in the Colorado Front Range, we tend to have hot and dry summers with cooler nighttime temperatures. Now, the most important tip I can give you to help plants survive during the hot summertime temperatures are to regulate your soil and your soil moisture levels and temperatures using wood mulch. I recommend using arborist chips. Now, arborist chips you can typically find for free, and they contain a good combination of wood mulch and leaf matter. And there's also a whole other host of benefits for using wood mulch. As it breaks down in the compost, it will increase your soil's capacity and habitat for microorganisms, worms, beneficial insects, and fungi. Hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Melinda. I'm one of Raintree Nursery's Plant Ambassadors, and I'm coming from my backyard in the Midwest. We wanted to talk a little bit about how we keep all of the plants that we get from Raintree Nursery happy, healthy, and moist, especially when things get really dry. I know here in Wisconsin where I live, we had about a month of time where we got absolutely no rain. So some of the things I do to try to keep my plants moist without spending too much money is I'll actually put a fairly substantial mulch layer underneath my trees. This does a couple things. It helps prevent weeds from growing around my trees, which might cause them problems, grass, as well as it keeps that area moist and it holds the moisture in really, really well.
So some plants don't like to get too hot. And for those plants, I plant them on the north side of my house so they get some afternoon shade. I can also use my umbrella to give them a little bit of temporary shade. Now, our plant ambassador, Heather, who grows in Texas, has a lot to say about this. Take it away, Heather.
The first thing you need to be concerned about is site selection, and this has to do with sun exposure. If you have a plant that needs full sun, you need a site that's going to get at least 6 hours of sun a day. There are also plants that most places need full sun, but down here need afternoon shade. I have a few of those. Persimmons are one, dragon fruit is another, elderberries would be another for me. Some of them just have to have some shade in the afternoon.
Now, if you're dealing with a plant that has special needs, or a young plant and you're going through a really extreme temporary heat wave, then coming up with a way to temporarily shade things is a really fine idea. This is a wood cutting rack that we have on the property, and I have a really precious new plant that's having a hard time coming out of dormancy. I want to shade this plant so that all it gets is a little bit of morning sun and it's shaded for the rest of the day. So I took a tall thing that we happen to have lying around and burlap that I happen to have lying around, and I've put it on the sunward side of this tree. You could do this with a table that has an umbrella. You could do it with a ring of wire that you normally would use for winter protection, and then cover that with a burlap bag or a pillowcase. You can really get creative here. It doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be particularly durable. It just has to get you through a temporary situation. Another strategy that I have used successfully is to plant cool weather loving plants in the shade of other productive plants. In this case, I used planting the red currant under a productive plum tree to shade the currant. I still get production from the currant, I get production from the plum, and everybody is happy about being in the right temperature. Another kind of setup that works like mulch but allows you to double your harvests is to use ground cover to shade the soil. Here is an example. I have my golden raspberries, and underneath them I have strawberries. Now you could use any low-growing plant as a ground cover style mulch. You could use lingonberries or ground cover raspberries, anything that's going to shade the soil and that will tolerate getting a little bit shaded by what you're growing above it. When you're growing in pots, it can be really useful to gather the pots together so that individual pots will shade each other's roots. And you can see how useful this is with this one particular plant. It got a little bit too much sun. The top is very crispy, but if you look down low, you can see it's still really lush and green where it was shaded by the coolness of the other pots. All I have to do is clip off this top and let it go. Now, if you're planting trees in pots and you plan to keep the tree in a pot, it's really important that you use as large a pot as possible. A tree will love all the extra root space and you won't have to root prune it as much. Pots are inherently dynamic environments and can get really hot. So having some extra space for mulch and soil is going to be really good for your tree. And whenever I'm planting something in a pot, I always want to have enough space to add a companion plant that will cascade down the sunny side of the pot and help keep those roots cool as the summer heat gets stronger. One of my favorite strategies for working with very difficult, hard, dry, scabby soils is to use in-ground Hugelkultur. Hugelkultur is this amazing strategy where you add wood to the subsoil area of your planting holes. Heather has a fantastic set of photos on her blog, which is called crazygreenthumbs.com. Check that out. And she shows us that there are several steps to creating a hugelkultur below your tree planting hole. First, you need to dig a channel, and you want to make sure the channel is lower than the lowest part of your planting hole would be normally. Then you take very rotten wood, like rotten firewood is a great way to add this wood, and you lay it down in the bottom of the trench. On top of the rotten wood, you put rotten hay or straw or some kind of composted organic matter, and then you put compost on top of that. And by then, you should have brought your hole up to the regular planting height, which is about 12 inches below the soil surface. Then you put your tree in, you backfill with 1/3 compost and 2/3 soil. And what you've done is you've created this amazing natural sponge under the root zone of your trees that will hold water. It degrades very slowly, and it can make a fantastic growing area for individual plants. And there you have it. Great tips from all over the U.S. about all kinds of ways you can keep your plants happy in the heat. And if you've got more, feel free to put them in the comments. We want to hear them. Now, I'm going to go back to having my hot girl summer. Thanks for joining us. It's Laura with Raintree Nursery. Keep on growing.